Today on Ramblings with Rebecca, we're back for real. Let's talk about everyone's favorite subject. Legal criteria for statehood. Yes, indeed. It's grand exciting. The first thing that I thought that we'd do, now that I'm actually rambling at you, and I swear I'm going to keep to some kind of schedule, is the dissertation that I wrote for Edinburgh, which I never actually properly rambled at you about. So, I introduced it vaguely, I talked about a few things, and then I kind of just let it wash away. I looked at the role that international environmental agreements can play in building legal recognition for statehood for semi-state actors. I don't know if that meant anything to you, but it will by the end of this week. So this was a subject that was interesting to me because it involved looking at Palestine, and also it was just helpful in that I have never had explicit legal training on the concept of statehood. That wasn't any of the modules that I took. They were around environmental and human rights with a little bit of conflict law. So the dissertation was a helpful excuse to read up and get to know this better. So the dissertation reads as kind of a primer, if you will, on legal statehood, and then also on certain environmental agreements in the international agreement that may or may not, or international arena, sorry, that, and how those things interact with the concept of statehood in a legal perspective. It was very legal, but it was also somewhat activist-y in nature, in that I was exploring how actors who aren't necessarily considered states, Palestine, Taiwan, might push that agenda if we think that is a more just thing to have happen. And of course that can be a debate. I'm not going to do, I mean, I guess I could do a ramblings on is Palestine a state? The basic answer is, it depends. Because international law, as we've discussed, is this weird nebulous thing where that's up to the states themselves, and there isn't an overarching global police or decider, right? So whether or not Palestine is a state legally depends on whether or not other states say that it's a state, more or less. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. I'm not a time traveler. We'll talk more about that tomorrow, as I will get into legal recognition of statehood, which is a particular subset of what we'll be talking about today. Statehood itself is, of course, central to questions of international law, as well as accountability, enforcement, and as citizens of a state, what the heck does that mean? It may surprise you to know that actually there is not a clear or authoritative definition in international law about what a state is. Nowhere in completely agreed upon international law does it say X, Y, Z makes a state. This is not true for a lot of things. Other things do have explicit treaties defining them. Many things do, in fact. State is not one of them. In 1933, a group of states did try to do this through the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. And that is an attempt to codify what statehood means. It's a treaty by states to do that. But that particular convention was passed by a small regional subset of states, and it was 1933, right? So it was decided upon before a lot of current states in our system even existed as nations, as states. And it has a lot of contention. So that's not even agreed upon by states, which is what makes international law, is that states agree to it. There are many various criteria that are suggested. We'll talk briefly through some of them, since I now only have like 30 seconds. A permanent population. A state has to have people. Makes sense. Define territory. Most definitions of state say that you need to have some kind of borders, boundaries, and there are arguments about if those two things are different. But some kind of space that you control and that your people are in. A government. Okay, state needs to have some kind of government. So far, so good. Some go further to say you have to have good governance. You're not a state unless you actually have a good amount of good or stable governance and, are there. There's an expectation of permanence. I am so going to go over 5 minutes, and I'm very bad, but bear with me. Expectation of permanence. The idea that the state's going to last forever. So, like, a state cannot be legally a state if everyone knows that it's going to be completely quashed tomorrow. Independence. A state has to be its own thing and not under the direct rule or thumb of another government, another territory, that kind of thing. Sovereignty. Is a little bit different than independence. Not just independent of other states, but also the government has absolute authority over the area. Okay, and states are required by law to respect the sovereignty of other states. So one indication and one criteria for legal statehood is that that is happening, that other states are acknowledging your sovereignty and not, getting all up in your business. Other, I suggested criteria include that the population obeys you. So that a sign of whether or not the government is there and it's actually a state is that there's some kind of recognition from the people and that you are, in fact, the appropriate and legitimate ruler. Legal order. And then recognition, which is the big one that I'm on. So we're going to table that for tomorrow because I'm already so over time. I introduced this too long. A few other criteria. Relations with other states. The capacity to engage with the globe on a state-to-state level. So if no other states are trading with you as a state, good sign that probably you're not really a state. An organized economy. Some kind of transportation system. And then some people go even further and say that a state will have fictional parts. So things like embassies, ambassadors. That is also a part of criteria. So that's a big, long laundry list. States have those more or less, depending on the states. And there are some states that pretty much everyone agrees are states that don't fulfill those, according to some people's, what does good governance mean, right? Again, not all definitions include all of these criteria, and there isn't a fully agreed upon definition. So these are pulled from a wider range of various scholars' suggestions of random treaties, not random treaties, obviously, but, multiple treaties that sometimes say contradicting things. The list is not all-inclusive, and a lot of lists don't include all of these. They'll do different subsets. The big ones, I would say, are people, territory, and recognition. And the others tend to kind of fall from those things, more or less, right? So if you've got some kind of government centralized in a people in a specific area, and other states recognize that that's going on, probably you're a state. But legal recognition is actually kind of funny sometimes, as we will look at tomorrow. And I'm sorry that I went over so long, but the law, it's just so stimulating.